three different techniques the CIA used in bringing down governments in Iran, Guyana, and Cuba. The CIA's first success in bringing down a government came in Iran in 1953. Iran was then in the British sphere of influence in the Middle East. But British oil interests there had been nationalized by the new Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. The Americans, fearing that Iran's huge oil reserves would fall into Soviet hands, agreed to get rid of Mossadegh. The plan was for a coup to be mounted in Iran by this man, Kim Roosevelt. He was a CIA agent and grandson of the former U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt. The CIA plan was approved at a meeting in the State Department in Washington early in 1953. It had to follow one basic rule. The U.S. government must not be seen to be involved.
There was some discussion, and Foster Dulles went around the table, and the only person on the State Department side whom I can remember as taking any kind of a very specific position was Ambassador Henderson, who was back for this meeting. And he said that he wanted to know none of the details. He felt that this was a considerable departure from diplomatic tradition, but he felt it was required by the situation. He wanted to approve it, and he wanted to know as little about it as possible.
In 1953, Iran was ruled as now by the Shah, but in those days he was young and inexperienced with little power. Mossadegh and his nationalist party controlled the country. Roosevelt's plan was to get the Shah to force a confrontation with Mossadegh in which the Iranian people would be encouraged to rally to the Shah. So Roosevelt and a small team of CIA men entered the country illegally and went underground.
Well, agency personnel, I would say 6 or 8 at the most. And the money that was available there, well, I can't remember. But I think we had... we probably had $700,000 or $800,000 available, of which we used during the course of the operation maybe $10,000.
Are you saying that only $10,000 and 6 or 8 agents were needed to mount a whole operation of that nature?
Well, the Iranians were organizing themselves, and really all they needed was support and, to some extent, professional guidance.
To bring about the coup, Roosevelt simply looked for the forces opposed to Mossadegh. He found them in the Iranian army. The CIA's choice to replace Mossadegh was General Zaghedi. To start the crisis, Roosevelt wrote a letter which he got the Shah to sign, dismissing Mossadegh and putting General Zaghedi in his place. At first, the plan went badly wrong. Mossadegh refused to accept the decree. Instead, his supporters took to the streets and rioted, demanding that the Shah step down himself. With events beyond his control, the Shah fled to Rome. Then Roosevelt and his agents pulled off an extraordinary feat. In 3 days, they manipulated the anti-Shah demonstrations into anti-Mossadegh riots.
Well, it was not difficult at all because the hard core of the Iranian element was there and ready to move. And what they needed was advice, some assistance, some physical support, occasional small amounts of money.
Roosevelt and his agents wanted to persuade the Iranian army to begin arresting the Mossadegh supporters on the streets. He did this by lending them U.S. military equipment. Later, Major General George Stewart secretly testified before Congress on how the coup was engineered.
When this crisis came on and the thing was about to collapse, we violated our normal criteria. And among other things we did, we provided the Army immediately on an emergency basis. The guns that they had in their hands, the trucks that they rode in, the armored cars that they drove through the streets were all furnished through the Military Defense Assistance Program.
With the army arresting Mossadegh's demonstrators, Roosevelt and his CIA agents went round the bazaars of Tehran giving out dollars to get people out on the streets shouting pro-Shah slogans. In just 3 days, the CIA swung the crowds away from Mossadegh to the Shah. Mossadegh himself was arrested by the army and the Shah returned in triumph from Rome. This coup had been the CIA's safest kind of operation, political intervention. Roosevelt and a handful of CIA men changed the government by organizing revolution on the streets. 300 people died during the rioting, but the involvement of the CIA was kept secret. Tom Brayton was a director in the CIA's clandestine section.
What was the psychological effect on the agency of that operation?
Well, it was not the first foreign success in the dirty tricks department, but it was certainly the first big one. And since it was a complicated, dangerous, difficult operation and was performed so successfully with such little use of manpower and very little use of money, that it probably gave the agency its first pair of long trousers.
The coup was as far-sighted as it was bold. Today, 20 years later, the Shah is America's strongest ally in the Middle East. With his oil revenues, he's turned Iran into an armed fortress against communism. The CIA's part in the operation began to leak in the 1960s, but one aspect of the story has never been told before. According to a highly placed CIA official talking to World in Action, it was the British Foreign Office and MI6 which asked the CIA to topple Mossadegh. In accordance with their normal practice, they've refused to comment on this report. But in any case, the coup didn't do Britain much good. The British government lost its monopoly on Iranian oil, and the US picked up 40% of the Shah's oil contract.